We see Jesus going into the desert, being led by the Spirit, almost like there's kind of this arranged meeting or something. And to be tempted, but I really like the word tested better. Because being tested, it implies there's something coming. It implies there's a purpose to all this. It's this challenge as if he's being not just tempted to try to be torn down, but he's being tested to try to be built up, to be prepared for something. It's also affirming in a way of being able to pass this. As if this test in itself is a tool that's preparing Jesus for what's coming. And so the challenge Jesus faced in the desert, they're symbolic of the challenges that he's going to face throughout his ministry. It's almost a prelude to the struggle that he's going to have against demons and against evil and against his opponents throughout his ministry. And so he goes in the desert, which is a place for cleansing, but also kind of a place, and like if you see throughout Scripture, it's a place for cleansing. It's a place for confrontation with oneself in a way. And so here he is in the desert, hungry. Hunger is on the line. He's fasted for 40 days, a number with a lot of symbolic meaning, right? 40 days, a number associated with trial, with testing, but also coming out on the other side of it better. The number 40 it's got some implications of purification attached to it. And so it's also interesting is we didn't see this in the text, but this is right after he was baptized. So Jesus he's baptized and then goes straight from his baptism into the wilderness. And it's very similar experience to what Israel went through in the Old Testament. They are baptized in the Red Sea, and they come out of the Red Sea and then go straight into the wilderness and facing hunger. Jesus is reliving the story of Israel in a different way. And so it's kind of associating this Israel experience with Jesus, and really because it's Israel, it's us. So it's kind of connecting us to Jesus' story. So there's this temptation of Israel, there's this temptation of Jesus, but also kind of our own temptation that we identify with here. But Jesus was tempted and was without sin. We as the church are the new Israel. And I think as we go through this, we're going to see how we can identify with some of these testings, some of these challenges that Jesus has faced. While Jesus is tired, he's hungry, and he's in a weakened state, the devil shows up. And he starts out by saying, if you are the Son of God, if you are the Son of God. Remember what Jesus has told at his baptism. He's told, this is my Son whom I love. And here Satan is already, shortly after that, already trying to make him question what God said about him. God tells Jesus, you are my Son and I'm pleased with you. But Satan kind of says, you really believe that? I think we all kind of have that voice in our head, that inner demon that makes us question, am I really who God says I am? Am I really fearlessly and wonderfully made? Am I really forgiven? Am I really a child of God? An heir? Was I really bought at an incredibly high price? Am I really loved? Am I really valued? Am I really accepted? We all deal with that question at some point. Maybe it comes down to, am I really worthy of love? Am I really worth loving? So Satan's poking at that. He's challenging that. Are you, Jesus, who God says you are? Are you, church, who God says you are? Do you really believe God? I think we all kind of wrestle with this. So Satan's kind of saying, hey, Jesus, prove it. And I don't know who he's challenging Jesus to prove it to. Maybe it's prove God. Maybe it's prove it to me. Or maybe it's prove it to yourself. Do you really believe that, Jesus? You really believe you are who God says you are? Then prove it. And so I think there's another inner demon that we wrestle with deep down in all of us. We have this desire, this need to prove ourselves. We want to show others that we are good, that we are valuable. We want to make others proud of us. We want to show ourselves and others that we are good and that we are enough. And a lot of us kind of live in this continual state of trying to prove that we are good or worthy or cool. And maybe it's through the cars we drive, the people we hang out with, the places we travel to, the things we post on social media. Maybe it's through our looks or our athletic ability or our resume. A lot of us are trying to prove ourselves in some way. So I want to ask you this morning, in what ways are you still trying to prove yourself? In what ways are you trying to show people that you are good, that you are valuable, that you are admirable? In what ways does your sense of self-worth hinging on how others see you and how others view you? How are you trying to prove yourself? And then maybe the next question is, who are you trying to prove yourself to? Is it peers? Is it parents? Is it people in here? Is it teachers? How are you trying to prove yourself, and who is it to? I hope that we can get to the place where we feel confident enough, accepted enough, valued enough, and loved enough that we don't really have to prove ourselves anymore. That we can just be confident in who God says we are, so we don't have to prove ourselves. But Satan, here he's trying to poke at that insecurity of who God says we are. And he's trying to use that. Don't let Satan get that foothold of using that insecurity against you. So he tells Jesus, prove to me, prove to yourself, prove God by changing these stones to bread. Use your divine power, not for others, not for the good of others. Use it for yourself. Be a self-serving wonder worker, which I always think that would be cool. To be able to just, amongst other things, be able to turn whatever you want to any kind of food. Dude, that's awesome. I would become morbidly obese very quickly if I could do this. But surely, beyond just that, beyond changing things into food, surely at some point in Jesus' life and in Jesus' ministry, something crossed his mind at one point where he could claim his divine rights, his divine powers, and use them to just make his life a little bit easier. Maybe use them to change someone's mind who's arguing with him. Maybe ease the pain of his sore feet a little bit. Maybe, use the Jedi mind trick on a Pharisee, to make himself not feel pain on the cross. There are a lot of ways he could have used his divine powers for his own ends, to self-serve. But he never did. And because of that, he can claim being completely human. He can be that leader who totally understands us and identifies with us. He never got to cheat at life. He experienced everything we do, yet was without sin. And I think sometimes maybe we have this same temptation with our own giftedness. How are you going to use the gifts and talents and skills that God gave you? Are you just going to use them for you? Or are you going to use them for others? I think this is an inner challenge that we all wrestle with. Do you think of the things you have, the abilities you have, as something that God gave you? Or just something that, they're inherently mine and I can use them however I want? Think about it. Maybe God made you a talented singer or musician. Do you use that to bless God and provide meaningful environments for others to bless God? Or do you use it to show off how awesome you are and how talented you are? God made you a charismatic leader. Do you use that to help lead the church to be what God wants it to be? Or do you use it to get your way and keep your church as comfortable as you like it? Make sure everything goes your way. Is that how you're using your God-given leadership skills? Hey, you're a creative and engaging teacher. Do you use that skill only when you're getting paid? Or do you use it at the church? Are you using those gifts to bless the kids and the adults at this church? Maybe you've got plenty of money. You're wealthy. You're affluent. Do you use that to bless the church and to be generous to others? Or do you use it to bless yourself and control the church? To always have strings attached to whatever you give. Which I say these things just throwing out examples. I don't really think we have that problem here. I think everybody who gives to the church here is very, very generous and doesn't ever say, oh, I'm only going to give if you do this. We don't have a lot of that here. We're a blessed congregation in that way. I also think of King David. We're talking about him on Sunday mornings in Bible class in here. He gave in to that temptation to use his God-given power and authority and gifts for himself. When he sinned with Bathsheba, he used that power. He abused it. He used it for him. Jesus didn't do that, though. And that's one of the points here in this temptation story, in the story of his testing, is where Israel failed, where David failed, where we failed. Jesus was without sin. But there's this temptation in all of us to use the great things we have, the skills we have, the traits, the gifts, to just use them for ourselves and not bless others. Jesus was tempted by that here, turning the stones to bread. But I'm sure it was a prelude to many other times where he had similar temptations. And so I want to ask you this morning, in what ways are you squandering your God-given blessings on yourself? In what ways are you kind of giving in here and only using the good things God's given you for yourself? We need people to be reaching deeper. We need people to be blessing this church and others more, blessing this community more. And I think maybe Satan was also poking at Jesus' human need to be productive, to be successful, whatever that means. A need I think a lot of us also have. So maybe a special challenge for those like Jesus is this. We have this challenge in doing ministry where we want to be successful and relevant, productive. And so here he's saying, hey, Jesus, make food, work, produce, get results, be relevant. I think this was a challenge throughout his ministry. Sometimes, and I want to, speaking for ministers for a moment, sometimes ministers in our struggle, we ministers struggle with self-esteem. We struggle with self-worth. Sometimes we struggle with it by having too much of it or not enough of it. And we tell ourselves, and I think we all do this, we aren't relevant. I remember hearing a lot of students say, I don't have a gift. We aren't good at anything. We aren't needed or wanted. We aren't successful. Maybe we've been told you aren't good unless you are producing, unless you have some easy, tangible results to show. I think ministers struggle with that. I think people struggle with that. It's like, I want some measurable results, but things are just moving slower than I had thought. So maybe this is Satan's way of saying, hey, Jesus, let's see some quick, productive results. I don't really believe you're God, and I don't really believe he's working unless I'm seeing some results quick. Let's see him. Where are they at? I think that's something we all struggle with. I think that's a desire in all of us to want to see quick, measurable results. But often, ministry and service, it takes time. It takes energy. You will see cool results. You will see good results, but sometimes it is slow. Sometimes it feels like what we're doing is fruitless. There's not that quick payout. But a lot of things that are worth doing. A lot of life-changing things. A lot of world-shaping things. They don't happen overnight. It takes time before there's this payout. And so Satan's saying, hey, take a shortcut. And a lot of times there's this temptation to take a shortcut. Or just give up. Because we're thinking, well, this didn't get the results I wanted, and I tried for a couple of days, and it didn't work, and now I quit, and I give up. So there's this temptation to shortcut or quit. And so maybe sometimes we shouldn't get so caught up on being relevant, getting results. Sometimes that's a healthy mindset, but it can very quickly become an unhealthy mindset. To want to be productive and feel like it's not worth it if we're not being productive enough and getting those quick results. But here, Jesus chooses to not be productive. And you can really see a lot of times in his ministry where he wasn't productive in the way people wanted him to be. He wasn't productive by throwing out Rome. He wasn't productive by being violent, by not becoming a political king. He was saying, hey, I'm not going to be the productive person you want. I'm not going to give you the results that you want here. And in not being productive, he identifies with the lowly. He identifies with the servants, those who do good things but aren't celebrated for what they've given. So I like that he takes this route here. But then look at his response. His response to what Satan says really shows maybe what Satan was poking at. And it's in Deuteronomy. He quotes Deuteronomy 8. It's really verse 3. But I wanted to put in a little more context of what he's really saying here. And it's interesting. All of Jesus' responses to Satan he quotes Deuteronomy. And they're all associated with Israel's testing in the desert. It's all connected. It's all as you look at this story, Scripture wants you to think back to Israel and the desert. And Jesus' quotes are pointing back to it. So Deuteronomy 8, 2-3 says, Remember the long way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, in order to humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. He humbled you by letting you hunger, then by feeding you with manna, with which neither you nor your ancestors were acquainted, in order to make you understand. Here's the quote. One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. So this time of testing, it was to teach them to be humble and to learn to rely on God, and learn to let God take care of you. You don't have to be productive. God will be productive. Maybe even to warn them of these dangers of self-sufficiency. Dangers of saying, you know what, I don't need God. I can do it myself. Dangers of thinking, you know what, I'm going to go at it alone. I don't need help from my community, and I don't want to ask for help. I got this. I'm strong enough. Sometimes we have a hard time admitting, I need help. I need God. I think in the Old Testament, Saul really struggled with this. He often tried to force God's hand to do it himself, take matters into his own hands. We talked about class this morning when Samuel didn't show up to make the sacrifice before a battle. It wasn't Saul's job. Saul wasn't authorized to do it. But Saul goes and just makes the sacrifice instead. Couldn't wait on God. Sometimes we have a hard time waiting on God, and we just want to do things ourselves. And somewhere in that is a lack of trust. And so I want you to think about in what ways are you really just not trusting in God and saying, you know what, God, God, you can sit this one out. I got this. In what ways are you thinking God can't be trusted? So I'm just going to do it myself. Okay, yeah, I'm going to pray, but in the end, I'm going to have my backup plan, and I'm going to take care of things myself. How are you not waiting on God? How are you not trusting in God and just trying to be self-sufficient? Satan is offering to Jesus this quick way, this me way. And I think he does that to all of us. You're strong enough. You got this. You take care of it. Jesus is in some ways really offering the easier way. You don't have to do it. It's not all on you. Trust in God. He will take care of you. He cares for you. Lean on him. Admit that you need him. Some of us really have a hard time with that. Admit you can't do it alone. God, forgive us for trying to be kings of our own lives. God, forgive us for trying to be masters of our own universes. God, help us to trust in you, rely on you, and quit worrying about doing it all on our own and being productive. If you are here this morning and you are ready to say, I believe God is who he says I am. I believe I am who God says I am. Or if you haven't believed that, if you believe lies about who you are, but you're ready to reclaim the status that God has given you, to reclaim that trust and that belief in God. If you want to give your life to him, if you have any need at all, we invite you to come now as together we stand and sing.